This is Paul Johnson with the New Frontiers. Today our panel include Henry Tomson as well as Bob Robb, and we're going to be talking about a fascinating issue, and that is Arizona ready for an independent governor? In this particular discussion, we're going to not only talk about it in Arizona, but we're going to try to expand out the conversation to talking about the independent movement around the country and whether or not all that's happening with the Trump administration and the divisions that are taking place, whether or not being an independent actually is more viable. The reason that we focused on Arizona is because there's just no doubt there's a real potential for an independent race to happen here that would be a serious race for someone for independent. Now, I have said at the end of every one of our shows that I'm just an ordinary, optimistic American that still believes that the United States is a great cause for good. So the reason that we're focused on independence today is because I believe that both political parties seem to be drifting away from what's right with America. In fact, I just wrote a book about that. It's called What's Right with America and How to Keep It That Way. Myself and a guy by the name of Larry Aldridge, who's a constitutional scholar. It's a book you can pre-order on Amazon now, but it talks about a lot of the concepts that we're going to talk about in this show. And unfortunately, the independent party or the independent group of people seem to be the only ones willing to espouse those old ideals. In any event, if you like what it is that we're talking about here, push that subscribe button and let's get this show going.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon and disticate and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
This is Paul Johnson with the New Frontiers, and I'd like to welcome you back to our panel. Now, two of us today are in studio. The columnist Bob Robb and I are both here. Lord Henry Tomson, Professor Tomson, is online with us here. Henry, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Paul. It seems I keep getting promoted. I was just Sir Henry the other day, but now I'm Lord Henry. Soon it's going to be like Your Majesty or something.
I thought I was Lord Mayor when I was mayor because people would always say, Lord Mayor, please don't do that. It was like constant. And Bob, welcome to the show. Welcome to being in studio.
Good to be with you.
Yeah. So we're in full swing studio to be able to pull this off today. My little studio that I have actually in my office wouldn't accommodate us the way that I would like. So thanks to Full Swing for hosting us here today as well. All right, so here's what I'm hoping to focus on. I'm going to focus on two things. We're going to talk a little bit at the end of the show about the 100-day mark, what's been taking place. We'll hit a variety of issues. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to start today with Arizona politics. And while we're going to be talking about Arizona politics, I've had a keen interest for a long period of time on this independent movement that's been taking place. How do we engage more independent or other voters, and how do we engage independent candidates? Well, Bob, who's on our show today, Robert Robb, you can find him on Substack, wrote a great article. I really enjoyed reading it. We'll talk a little bit about the race, the Arizona governor's race, but you talked about the idea of one of the three candidates actually running as an independent for governor. Before we do that, help me do a setup on the race. Who's actually running inside the Republican primary? Who's running in the Democratic primary? So the people watching can have a better understanding.
Katie Hobbs is the incumbent Democratic governor running for re-election. And at present, there are two strong candidates running for the Republican nomination. Karen Taylor Robson, a real estate consultant, former member of the Board of Regents, who ran in 2002 and came up short against Kari Lake for the nomination, and Andy Biggs, a former state Senate president and current congressman, and a strong MAGA figure in Congress. The Republicans in Arizona face a dilemma, which is over the last several election cycles, and most profoundly in 2022, when was the last time the governor's office was on the ballot, a endorsement from Donald Trump was required in order to win the Republican nomination, but was fatal in the general election. In 2002, Trump endorsed candidates, won out in the Republican primary over what was arguably, and I think pretty surely, better qualified candidates who would have done better in the general election for U.S. Senate, governor, attorney general, secretary of state. And the Trump slate lost all of the races in the general election. Initially, Robson got Trump's endorsement for her run this time around. Carrie Lake got it last time. Robson did not. But Robson isn't trusted by the MAGA leadership in the state. She's regarded by them as a traditional Republican, sort of masquerading as a Trump loyalist, whereas Biggs' credentials as a MAGA loyalist are unchallenged, unquestioned. So recently, Donald Trump endorsed Biggs as well. And I think that sets up a very strong electoral dilemma, mini dilemma, for Robson. I think she will be in danger between now and the Republican, when the votes are counted, the Republican primary, of losing Trump's endorsement, and it will require that she support everything he does, irrespective of how dumb or destructive or offensive it might be. In Arizona, there are several 100,000 swing voters that decide the outcome of our general elections now. And that's how in 2018 we got Doug Ducey, a Republican, for governor, and we got Kyrsten Sinema, then a Democrat, for U.S. Senate. In 2024, we got Donald Trump getting Arizona's Electoral College votes, but a progressive Democrat, Ruben Gallego, winning an open U.S. Senate seat. So those swing voters are what decide the outcome of the general election. So how does Robson successfully compete with Biggs for the MAGA vote to get the nomination without becoming so MAGA tainted that she can't win a general election like Katie Hobbs and suffers the same general election fate by having alienated during the primary process all those swing voters that ultimately decide the outcome? So in the column, I posited a what I called a thought experiment, because I don't think there's any likelihood that Robson is actually going to run as an independent. But if she ran as an independent, and if she is a traditional Republican, and if she wants the office to be a pragmatic problem-solving governor, and she's got some expertise and experience in some of the big issues facing the state, if she ran as a independent, at a minimum, it would be personally liberating. She wouldn't be enthralled to everything that Trump did for the next year and a half. And she would be free to construct an Arizona-specific agenda, as opposed to running at the national MAGA agenda, which is what she did in 2022 and what she's done so far in 2026. And who knows whether you could expand those swing voters who aren't enough to win the election outright. You would have to bring into the fold a healthy component of people who generally vote for a party-affiliated candidate in order to actually win a plurality. But that might not be any tougher of a tightrope to walk than competing against Biggs for the MAGA primary without being so tainted that you can't defeat Katie Hobbs in the general election.
All right. Henry, do you, I don't know if you know any of the three candidates that are running. I know that you did know our last governor. Any thoughts on the existing three candidates that are running? Any perspectives that you might add on that?
I think that you'd probably rather be Andy Biggs at this stage of the race than Karen Taylor Robson, just because of his strong name recognition, strong background in Arizona politics, and having won a few elections in this state already. And then plus the Trump endorsement, he's looking very strong. I saw some poll results that had him up something in the mid 60% range among likely Republican voters. So my impression is that you'd rather be Andy Biggs at this point in the race than Karen Taylor Robson. I think Katie Hobbs, the incumbent governor, is a bit of a dark horse, really, because she seems to have kept a relatively low profile. She seems to have avoided scandal, I would say. I don't think she's really made a name for herself by any major policy achievements, but she also hasn't, I would say, made a name for herself with any great missteps or scandals. And so I think that you'd probably rather be Biggs or Hobbs, and Karen Taylor Robson is the sort of the second string Republican, not quite Trumpy enough candidate, is in a really tricky position. The independent run, it's provocative. I like to think about it, but it's going to be hard, right? Because as Bob points out, you've got to peel off a significant number of Republicans or Republican-leaning voters, probably even a few Democrats, to get within range, even with a vote split three ways. So I think that Biggs and Hobbs are probably feeling pretty good about this race at the moment, and maybe Karen Taylor Robson is thinking about her options in the way that Bob did in his piece.
Yeah, so I might add just a little bit of color. I know all three. Well, I know Karrin the best. I know Katie Hobbs and Andy Biggs just from different events and reading about them and understanding kind of where they're coming from, which isn't always the most accurate way to know them. But I've gone hiking with Karen Robson down in the Grand Canyon. By the way, she's a stud, like you do. I say I went hiking with her, like 3 miles behind her, hiking with her. But I do want to add a little bit of color to her. And my disclosure up front would be, I really like Karrin. I think Karrin is a really good person. I've known her for a long time. And I think she would be a great governor. I think she does have a disadvantage in the Republican primary. What's interesting about Karrin is I actually probably got to know her indirectly a long time ago when I was mayor, because her dad, who was a Republican, I was a Democrat, came down and met with me and said, hey, there are things that we can do to be helpful. I'm going to oppose you in your next election, but I want to make sure that you're as big a success as you can be because I care about the city of Phoenix, which was kind of wild to me. I got that from Burton Barr and him, and I don't know if that happens anymore in politics, but it certainly used to. And Carl was a powerhouse all by himself. He had 2 kids, Andy and Karen. And Andy, I was pretty good friends with as well. I have stories with Andy that would probably get both of us in trouble. But nonetheless, I've known them for a while, and I like both of them. If you knew Karen, here's what you would know. There is no person better at getting a project done than Karen Robson. I mean, this is a lady that when she puts her mind into getting something done, she is just a go-getter. And she has gotten a number of projects done. The Williams Gateway project that happened in Arizona, that was in large part because of Karen. And again, to me, that is something that is admirable. I do think she's going to be challenged in the primary. And for many of her friends that I know that are supportive of Karen, the only reason that they're supportive, people in business, is because they believe that down deep she really isn't a MAGA person. They believe that she is a person that if you wanted to get pragmatic solutions from, to go get things done, to help out our infrastructure, our growth, our universities, whatever it was, that she's the candidate that you could go to that would actually move that forward. But they don't believe her on the MAGA stuff. They believe that she's doing what she has to do to win a primary. My guess is that's what MAGA people think, and therein lies the problem. So as we're looking at this, and I'm going to give my input as well, let me ask kind of as a starting point, what problems do you think that she would have to overcome if she actually ran as an independent?
There are several disadvantages that an independent has in Arizona specific and generally on the national level. In Arizona, the first obstacle is that in order to qualify for the ballot, you have to obtain approximately 6 times as many signatures as you do if you want to be on the Republican or Democratic primary ballot. You need far less than 10,000 signatures to get on the primary ballot as either a Democrat or a Republican. You need over 40,000 signatures to get on the ballot as an independent candidate for governor.
And that's real signatures, and you can bet as an independent you're going to get challenged by two political parties, so you better get 80,000.
No question about it. And then you need to be able to compete for public attention. And there are certain institutional advantages that political parties have in campaigns. You have their built-in fundraising apparatus that you can use. They have certain advantages in terms of postal rates and advertising rates and things like that. But the primary obstacle is one that we have already referred to, which is reflexive party-affiliated voting. Even though independents are now 34% of the Arizona electorate, a substantial hunk of even them have a default vote for one party or the other. And so communicating and effectively competing for their vote requires a tremendous investment in advertising and communication, voter communication. So overcoming particularly the signature obstacle and the communication greater need requires a lot of money. Now, Robson has a lot of money.
She has a lot of money.
So she could overcome those obstacles. And the last independent candidate in Arizona who also had those resources and ran as an independent was Bill Schultz in 1986. He got a very late start, but he did get 26% of the vote.
And that was against Evan Meekum and Carolyn Warner, as I remember.
That's correct. And Meekum ended up winning a plurality with a shade less than 40% of the vote. But Schultz got 26% of the vote. And in those days, only 11% of the Arizona electorate was registered independent. Today, it's 34%. So it's one of those things where I think that it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's the default view that an independent mainly, the largest question is, which of the two-party candidates do they draw the most from?
Mm-hmm.
I think probably that conventional wisdom is still sound. But there's reason to believe that there might be a path for an independent candidate with the resources to overcome the obstacles. And I think a contest between Katie Hobbs, who I think Henry is correct, has sort of a low profile, but I don't think she's instilled a lot of confidence in her leadership for the future of the state. And Andy Biggs, a pure MAGA candidate who voted to reject Arizona's Electoral College votes in 2020, I think you can see a path for a center-right problem-solving candidate. And if that is who she truly is, and I don't know her the way that you do, what she's going to put up with for the next year and a half, as opposed for going with that with all the gusto that you described, seems to me to be, almost a personal tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Karrin, I mean, she is a Republican, and she shares many of the Republican views, but she's not a crazy. She's not even close to being a crazy. She's not close to being supportive. Maybe she will have to be supportive, but being supportive of crazy ideas that may be coming out of that particular group.
Already in this campaign, she strongly applauded Trump's reciprocal tariffs that were based on nothing, that had any basis in reality. And she applauded the shameful berating of Zelensky in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
I mean, she's just got a whole string of that. Oh, so now is she in favor of tariffs on foreign movies? Is she in favor of reopening Alcatraz? I mean, the hits from the Trump show keep coming.
Yeah, and the challenge when you're only listening to people who are in that sphere is you actually believe that that's what Americans want. And it's just not. I personally think Donald Trump is going to be framed by tariffs. Win, lose, or draw. He's going to be framed by tariffs. He's going to be framed by the economic impacts that tariffs have, the challenges that it creates, the effects that it has on business. I hear from, I love this thought that he's like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and that there hasn't been anybody who's created as big a change in the first 100 days. That's true, but to be fair to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was going from a very bad economy to trying to create a better one. This has gone from a very good economy, maybe one of the best in American history, to something that looks like it's going to be very dark. The challenge for Republicans is that their instinct really is not to be pro-tariff. They were the free traders, but now they're stuck in this position of loyalty. And if they go in one direction, they're going to be anti-Trump, and that's just a death knell. And on the other hand, I know they're supporting a policy that they know down deep isn't in their best interest. What the independent movement gives you is the ability to be supportive when you want to be supportive, the ability to be supportive when you think it's a good idea, the ability to say that it's a dumb idea when down deep you know it's a dumb idea.
Well, and in terms of a general election, chart an independent path.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in Arizona, the winning formula would be what Youngkin did in Virginia, where he did not reject out of hand Trump, and he was endorsed by Trump. But he came up with a Virginia-specific agenda that he ran on and identified himself with. And so his entire political persona wasn't as a MAGA loyalist. It was as someone who had a plan for Virginia. And if that is what's in Karen Taylor Robson's heart, it's really highly unfortunate that she, because there's not a word of that. I mean, you talked about how the people who know her believe that she's not MAGA. Well, that's not a very large percentage of the electorate. Mm-hmm. And I think she has failed to communicate to the Haley Republicans, the 18% who showed up in 2024 to vote against Donald Trump in a primary that had already been decided. I mean, these are registered high-efficacy Republicans. 18% of them turned out in an election that was already decided to register a protest vote against Trump. Robson has done nothing in 2 election cycles to indicate to those people, I'm your candidate. Mm-hmm. I am going to earn your vote. Mm-hmm. You got to know her the way that you do and the other people who are supporting her to come to that conclusion. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think that gets it done.
I was going to just speak a word in Karen Taylor Robson's defense. I think that up until now, for her, the most likely strategy of success was to just be the Republican nominee. And to do that, she needed to appeal to that MAGA base. What you're talking about is doing something very different, which is running as an independent, right? So I think that everything she's done up till now has been completely rational. It would only be after she decided to run as an independent that she could turn her back on Donald Trump and his policies to some extent. And I think maybe the loss against Kari Lake in the primary last time might have informed her decision, except she did get the endorsement from Trump then leading up into this race, which of course made her calculus that she should stay in that lane as the Republican nominee. So I think what you're proposing is a break from the Trumpy base in the Republican Party, a move to an independent in which she brings the Haley Republicans with her, right? And that is quite different from trying to run within the mainstream Republican Party for the Republican nomination. I think what she has to do is make a calculation of risks. She has to weigh up the risks. What is the greater risk of defeat? Is it to run for the Republican nomination against Andy Biggs, or is it to chart this independent path? And I think that, ironically, at this point, the path that she thought was the lowest risk up till now, running for the Republican nomination, if you look at some of the poll numbers, it might be essentially a foregone conclusion that she can't beat Biggs when he's up 65% to 20-something% in the polls. Maybe there's not that much risk in switching lanes and running as an independent, because what has she got to lose?
I want to be sure that we acknowledge that this was just a thought experiment of mine, just some idle speculation. There's utterly no indication that Robson is thinking about doing anything other than running for the Republican nomination. But I cannot attribute what she's done to date as the most rational course of action from her, given what she ought to have anticipated occurring in the race. It's clear that her strategy was to cling to the Trump endorsement and clear the Republican field so she would be unchallenged. Given the evident distrust of her by the MAGA leadership in the state, I think it was inevitable that there would be a MAGA certified candidate contested. And once that candidate was clearly Andy Biggs, there was zero question that at a minimum, he would also get Trump's endorsement, depreciating the value of her endorsement and putting her on a very short string for the rest of the race. Nevertheless, she started investing heavily in advertising. And the only thing her message is in that ad is that she's been endorsed by Trump. Trump likes her and she likes Trump. That's the only message. And even in the Karrin, even if she runs in the Republican primary, her chance to overcome her disadvantage in competing for the MAGA vote is to convince the Haley Republicans that she's their candidate. And she needs to communicate in a way that motivates them to vote for her. It's a tricky political thing to do. I fully understand that. But the notion that she could defeat Biggs without doing that, I think was a lack of foresight. And she should have been creating an independent message to those people who aren't Trump enthusiasts but are Republican voters, that didn't criticize Trump, but created grounds independent for her to see her as something different, the way that Virginia voters saw Youngkin.
Doesn't it kind of depend who the marginal voter is for Robson? Because if the Republican primary is like whatever 70% Trump loyalists, the Republican primary voters, can't she sort of assume that those 18% of Nikki Haley voters are sort of already on her side, and the people that she really needs to convince are Trump loyalists? Doesn't that kind of explain her behavior?
I think she is assuming that. I don't think it's a correct assumption.
I agree with that.
What has she ever done or said in a broad public way to convince the high efficacy Haley voters? I mean, these are registered Republicans who turned out in a meaningless presidential preference primary and cast a vote against Donald Trump. She has never done anything in either campaign in terms of her public communications to indicate to those people that she should be a preferable option for them. She has simply assumed that they would intuit it the same way that the business leaderships that know her believe it. But she's never done anything to communicate to them.
Yeah, if you look at polling right now, Andy Biggs is within, in the latest poll, 1 point of Katie Hobbs, and he beats her in an early one. That's not true with Karrin. My answer would be as to why that is true is I think Karen's ads have been effective. It's turning off independent voters who are seeing Karrin as being the more pro-MAGA type candidate. But is that doing it inside the Republican base? Well, there the party plays a bigger role. First, there's a conversation that happens between people at the party level through grassroots workers that ends up kind of putting out the message. But if you ask most independent voters who Andy Biggs is, they don't know. In fact, many people believe in the last election, that had the Republican candidate just have kept her mouth shut, gone on vacation, she probably would have beat Katie Hobbs. But the fact that she spoke up and kept showing how extreme she was and how goofy she was created an environment where Katie Hobbs was able to beat her. Andy, he's not going to make that mistake. That's not going to be something that he does. I think he's a much more honed politician. But inside that primary, he is known for being a guy who is very conservative, specifically on the budget. He's one of the individuals that's been opposing Republican leadership on trying to balance. He wants a more balanced budget to be supported. My guess is he'll change that position now that he needs Trump also. But nonetheless, he's just going to do better, I think, with that group. And I think Karen's mistake in this primary, even if it is winnable for her, is she needs that group of Nikki Haley voters. And right now, I wouldn't suspect that she does have them. So,
but if every time she makes an appeal to a Nikki Haley voter, she loses 2 Trump voters, it's not working for her anyway. What is the positive sum vision here where it's not zero sum, right? Where you don't lose 1 or 2 Trump voters for every Nikki Haley voter you gain.
I think Youngkin had the right.
Yes, you develop an Arizona-specific agenda to do something about water, housing, and education, 3 subjects on which she has expertise and experience. And you run on Trump endorsement plus, not Trump endorsement exclusively. And in both her campaign against Lake and her campaign so far in this cycle, she's been MAGA agenda, Trump only. I obviously, if her message is, I disagree with Trump, then she loses what she can gain on the MAGA vote. If her agenda is, here's what I want to do about water, here's what I want to do about housing, here's what I want to do about education, she's giving those Haley voters a reason to believe, well, she's got some pragmatic problem-solving ideas and skills, and that's what she wants to do.
And I think that would help her in the primary.
Henry, it's a tough balancing act, no question about it.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree with your analysis, Bob. It's just that my reading of what's been going on is similar to yours, which is that it does seem very zero-sum, these calculations within the Republican primary electorate, and that the personal loyalty to Trump, you're either on the right side or the wrong side. And so I'm not sure whether it's possible to put together that sort of coalition within the primary vote.
I think authenticity matters. And again, from friends of mine who like Karrin, and again, I like Karrin, there's something distasteful about the lack of authenticity. And I think it's challenging for her. But where those issues that you spoke about a moment ago, to me, are the exact same issues that you would run against a Katie Hobbs on. You know, Katie, Governor Hobbs, I think has been challenged by trying to play a very low profile on everything except being pro-choice. Well, I think there's a great ability to run on a growth agenda inside of Arizona. And I think that cuts well. If you listen to Ezra Klein on this, we spoke about this in the past podcast. He wrote a book called Abundance. There are a group of Democrats who the idea of a growth agenda is appealing to. There's also a group of Democrats who don't like it. There are a group of Democrats, especially in the environmental field, who see growth and the whole growth agenda as being a bad thing. But, if you look at the water issue, you mentioned that a moment ago. We know we need between about 4 and 5 million acre feet over the next century to really be able to make up for our shortfall and our need. There's no plan by the governor for that. I mean, it's a conservation plan and a conserve plan, but there's nothing about how do we go get new sources. Now, if we would have built the Orme Dam and plant 6 years ago, maybe that would have covered us for 1 million acre feet. But if you built it today, it'd be about $8 billion. Well, for about $500 million, you could get a groundwater transfer issue where we're transferring issue into the water aquifers. And that has some issues itself as well. But there's no discussion about it. On the issue of energy and how do you deal with nuclear, there was a nuclear bill that came in front of the legislature. Again, Katie talked about why she supports a nuclear agenda, but then votes against the bill. On the housing issue, the same thing. She plays a very backward role. When you listen to Governor Hobbs, in my opinion, there is no sense of who she is, other than somebody who's very careful, very cautious, and just wants to hang on to the seat. That's not Karen Taylor. If you wanted a growth agenda, that is a person who I think you could be very supportive of. As an independent, I think those issues work for her. You said water, housing, and what was the third one? Education. Yeah. Those issues would work for her because I think she'd be very strong at them. But I agree with you also. In a primary, if she was advocating for those things, it begins to change the discussion. And Andy Biggs would have a harder time competing on discussing the details of those issues other than to apply some ideological bent to it than Karen would, who, if you, again, knowing Karen, she's a detail person. She can give you tons of details when she begins looking into an issue.
I agree with you, Paul. I think there's a big difference between an election where Donald Trump's on the top of the ticket and one where there's not as well. Because Trump being on the top of the ticket nationalizes a lot of these issues, which is his strength. You know, he's a nationalist. He cares about things like tariffs and immigration policy that's set in DC for the entire country. I think that if you could run a campaign that was very specifically focused on state level issues, if you had a strong agenda for all of them, I think that that is actually could be reconciled with Trump's presidency, in that you essentially say those are federal issues. I support the president, and not go into detail and go into and spend more time on the state level issues. And I think that would particularly work on a year when Trump is not at the top of the ballot. The question is, with the Republican primary electorate so primed, to use a pun, they want to hear about the national level issues. They want to hear, because that's what Trump always talks about. That's what they are interested in. And so, again, I'm not sure whether you can get through a Republican primary by playing that strategy, because although it makes sense logically that the state level issues, you can differ from the Trump line at the state level more than you can at the federal level, I'm not sure whether the Republican primary voters want to hear that.
But, if you go to, I'm going to go back to the independent cause here, because while I like her, she would never listen to me. I've only lost governor's races, so she would listen to somebody.
You've only lost one governor's race?
So she'd listen to people who've won them. And again, I care about her, and I hope she makes the right choice. But if you run as an independent, it gives you greater flexibility in a lot of ways. I mean, one way is you can start talking about how do you expand the base? How do you get independent voters to play a bigger role? And that can help engage them. But there's no doubt in my mind, you can also utilize a morality play inside as an independent that would take votes away from Republicans. There are lots of people in the religious community, I don't care what religion they are, who like the idea that we're focused on the border, that we're focused on trying to make certain that we don't have illegal immigration happen, and they're deeply appalled by how we're treating human beings. They don't like that. Right now, again, Governor Hobbs, she doesn't speak up against Trump on that other than to say that she supports it. On the other hand, the other side is not only do we want to get rid of them, we'd like to take them back to the border, stand them up against the wall, and shoot them. I mean, if you took that extreme of a position, there'd still be a defense amongst a group of people in the Republican Party. But that's not most Republicans. It may be the most Republicans speaking up right now. It's not the most Republicans. And so all of a sudden, you can begin to talk about morality in a whole different way as an independent that you can't talk about it as a Democrat. And she's smart enough that if she did that, she could figure out how to carve out votes from the Republican side and carve out votes from the Democratic side. Thoughts on that?
I think there is a strong possibility that the Haley Republican cohort will expand as we approach the 2026 election. That the reality of Trump's political soap opera, what I believe to be the negative effects on the American economy from his policies, and moving from getting tough on immigration to throwing people in foreign prisons without due process, can expand the people who are loyal Republican voters, likely to vote in the primary, who would be open to a different pitch that wasn't necessarily a repudiation, wasn't necessarily never Trump, but was willing to reflect their uneasiness about many of these things while developing a specific agenda for Arizona. I don't think there's any question that by the time we get to 2026 in the general election, that the number of crossover Republicans that an independent could appeal to will increasingly grow as the consequences of Trump's policy become even more apparent. And people just get tired of the soap opera nature of it. I mean, after just 2 years of Donald Trump, when the economy was doing pretty well and he had mostly had successes, Democrats picked up over 40 seats in the 2018 midterm election. And I think it was just people tired of the constant soap opera. So I believe that that the prospects of more of an independent path, either in the Republican primary or actually as an independent, will become more politically possible the closer we get to the 2026 election. Whether it will be enough to get a Robson over the line, either in a Republican primary or allow her to amass a plurality in a general election as an independent, I don't know. But I do believe that space, that political space, will probably grow.
Yeah, and my last comment to it would be, as a Republican, if she loses, she already knows what that feels like. When you get done, you just lost. But now, she has a great life. She doesn't have to worry about losing anything that really matters. She has a great group of kids, and she enjoys what she does. But it's like your hands in a bucket of water. When you get done, you pull it out of the same bucket of water. If she runs as an independent, I think she not only has a chance of winning, but even if she doesn't win, she's begun to establish a pathway and the ability for a group of people who today are being boxed out, whose ideas are being disassembled and disregarded and disrespected, to give them back a voice. And it's an important voice, and maybe begin to create a coalition that's changing long term, even if you're not successful. But I happen to agree with you on this. In 18 months, I think the biggest issue is going to be the economy, overwhelmingly. And I think these tariffs are going to, right, wrong, or indifferent, they're going to be the issue. They're going to be the thing that we're talking about. My bet is we're not going to be talking about them in a positive means. We're going to be talking about the damage that they've done to us. An independent is well suited to be able to talk about that issue much better than the existing incumbent Democratic governor, and much, much better than somebody who is, I'm going to support Trump no matter what terrible thing he does. Anyway, Henry, I'll give you last comment on this.
I think it's a long way to go, even in this primary race, if she stays in it. They say a week is a long time in politics. I think the best shot for anyone to win an election in two-party system is to be the major party candidate. There's still a long way to go until the primary. I think that Karen Taylor Robson would be smart to stay in it and fight hard in this primary and see what happens, because, anything could happen in the next year and a half that could raise or lower her fortunes for any number of reasons that we can not even imagine right now.
All right, so let's spend a little bit of time talking about the first 100 days of the Trump administration. And what I'd really like to do when we're talking about this is to talk about the spillover effect that may happen on congressional candidates and Republican candidates, where it is that this 100-day is going. I'm going to start with that we just received an economic report that said that we had about a 3%, was it 0.03% negative growth in GDP, which if that happens for 2 quarters, that means that you're economically in a recession. Now, there's a lot of interesting data in that and lots of different ways to parse that apart. But I think at the end of the day, that is right now becoming the single biggest read on the Trump administration's first 100 days. Have we actually been successful at creating this big, beautiful economy that he believed that we were going to create? It's not that the other issues aren't important. They do play a role. But, you know, I was listening to him the other day fighting with the Amazon guy, or at least having where he talked about speaking with the Amazon guy. But clearly what he didn't like was that Amazon was going to put on, here's the cost of tariffs in these new products. And his basic answer was, it's a declaration of war. Now, I would have looked at that and said, yeah, why don't you put it on there and talk about how you incentivize American products? I mean, if that's the goal, utilize it as a means to try to promote what it is that you're trying to promote. But what it said to me is he's terrified about what's happening on tariffs, and he doesn't quite know how to work his way around it, although I think he's a supporter of them. He knows that it's inflationary. He knows that the inflationary costs are going to be problematic, and he also knows that it's going to be a challenge for him economically. Saying that, you wouldn't know that from listening to him. But nonetheless, what's your view of the first 100 days?
I don't know that he knows that. What has happened is that adverse market reaction to his actions, if it becomes strong enough, has acted as a deterrent. Even if he believes in his heart of hearts that the markets are dead wrong and that he's headed on the right path. So I see what has happened more as a strong adverse market reaction being one of the few deterrents on what he otherwise would like to do. I don't think there's any question that we are in a period of economic stagnation, that the uncertainty, but both the tariffs that have already been leveled and the huge uncertainty as to what comes next freezes investment decisions. And that's being reported and felt universally. The other, in addition to the effect on the economy being the headline of the first 100 days, I think the very broad-based pushing to the outer extremes, and I would argue well beyond the outer extremes of presidential authority, in a way that suggests a disregard and a lack of respect for the rule of law, is the other main event coming out of the first 100 days. And that's generating some of the reaction that you were describing on the immigration topic. He is underwater in terms of public approval on every policy item you can name, and that includes immigration. Even though he has effectively reduced illegal immigration to negligible levels. Despite that, the public on net disapproves of his policies on immigration. And so I think that's the other big headline. I will say that in contrast to what he's done in terms of government spending to date, where he was asserting the authority to ignore acts of Congress establishing governmental agencies and not being able not to appropriate money, not to spend money that Congress has appropriated. The recent budget proposal that was issued by the Office of Management and Budget is the way it should be done. There's over 40 pages of very specific on discretionary spending. We want this to go up, we want that to go down. There's explanations as to why it's the case. As someone who has a radical view of federalism and the role, with respect to the role of the federal government versus state and local government, it overwhelmingly points towards restoring the state role and reducing the federal role in the whole myriad of grants that exist out there. And it's like we didn't understand why he went first with tariffs rather than with stabilizing the tax environment and beginning the deregulation agenda to get the economy going, and then try the tariff if he mistakenly wants to do it. There just wasn't that much to gain in closing federal agencies and not appropriating money and being told by the courts that you can't do it, as opposed to what he's now doing, which is saying, going forward for the 2026 budget, here's where we want to reduce federal spending, and here's why we want to reduce it, and here's why we want to increase it. He could have rallied some support for that, but now he's just got this reputation as this random slasher who doesn't follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. So let me just ask a question on the budget, because my feeling of what he talked about being $150 billion worth of cuts, we're really not making any progress towards reducing the overall deficit spending at this point in time. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with that. I mean, it claims $140 billion in reduced expenditures in fiscal year 2026, which begins in October, compared to fiscal year 2025, where we are. And that in the face of a $1.8 trillion deficit is movement in the right direction, but not a giant stride. And as long as he continues to put entitlement reform off the table, we're not going to make meaningful reduction. But it is a meaningful redirection in terms of the respective roles of the federal government and state governments, saying we're going to consolidate a lot of these grants, we're going to reduce some of them, we're going to eliminate others, because there's really not a federal role. These are state roles. So it has it moves in that direction, and it moves in the direction of eradicating DEI, which the Biden administration had embedded throughout the federal government and all sorts of grants and everything. A focus on energy production rather than fighting climate change. So there are directional changes in those recommendations for the 2026 budget that I think are very good. And if he hadn't created the chaos and showed an indifference to the rule of law or the separation of powers prior to getting to this point, which he got virtually no gain out of, I think the political reaction to what he's proposing would be far different.
Yeah, and it's and you've been consistent on this with Doge and other things. I see a number of things in the Trump administration that I think the direction was right. I think the idea of trying to find a way to cut the budget is correct. There's a new process that they're looking at in terms of how to go after regulations. I think that is correct. I tend to like the two people who I think are good inside his administration, is Marco Rubio and Treasury Secretary Bassett. I think they're more mainstream players that think at a bigger level, that are able to kind of come up with a better way to try to advance his agenda. I think he has some goofs in his administration who really have done him a disservice. We've said this in the past. I like Elon Musk. I drive one of his cars. That's what I like about him. I like SpaceX. That's what I like about him. Just because you're a genius at one thing doesn't mean you're a genius at everything. And he's not a genius at politics. He's just not. He's done damage to himself. He's done damage to the morale of of public workers. He's done damage to the overall process of making the cuts with very little success. I mean, we talk about 150 billion, but arguably, you have said this from the beginning, you're not going to do this by cutting employees. It's 9 out of $10 are pass-through dollars. Henry, how would you evaluate the first 100 days? And give us any perspective that you can from, you spent a lot of time talking to people from outside the United States as well, or at least understanding that perspective. Help us understand what you're hearing from them as well.
Well, I think that the Trump record so far is pretty mixed, but it has obviously not been well received by the public. When you look, there's been about a 10-point swing in his approval ratings since around the start of the year, which is a pretty big swing. It's about the same sort of swing that was associated with Biden's Afghanistan pullout, which really was a sea change in his presidency. So I think to have experienced that big a swing in public opinion so early in the administration is not a good thing for Trump. It spells trouble in the midterm elections. It spells trouble with his political capital, with other elected officials and people he needs things from across the country. And so I think that the Trump administration has created a lot of problems for itself. And the things that I think have really cut through have been things like the tariffs, but especially the stock market ructions around the tariffs, right? People, regular everyday Americans, have watched their 401ks plunge and then come back up again and then plunge again based on a few statements by the president. And it seemed incredibly probably disturbing to a lot of Americans to see swings of that magnitude. He hasn't been able to resolve the Ukraine conflict, and a lot of the back and forth between him and Vladimir Putin seemed to not have much of an effect. And I think that's probably also really shaken confidence in his leadership, right? Especially because he made such a big deal out of ending that conflict so quickly. And then there are these scandals like the Signal chat scandal with the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor, that there was a journalist from The Atlantic inexplicably on this unsecured Signal chat where details of active military strikes were going on. I think these are the sort of big picture things that everyday Americans will have picked up on that are reflected in the swing in public opinion against him. Opinion overseas is probably even more universally negative about Trump than here in the United States. The Europeans are very disturbed and alarmed at Trump's gestures to trying to take over Greenland, at his apparent abandoning of Ukraine against Russia, although, of course, that seems to now also not be quite so clear. The Europeans are moving to rearm themselves under the threat of not having the same support from the United States that they used to have. And they, of course, are extremely alarmed about the tariffs. They're very worried about not being able to export goods into the United States. They've imposed some retaliatory tariffs against the US in response, and are sort of trying to come up with a whole new political economic model over there, including more government spending on defense and things that will allow them to basically get along without the United States. There's a lot of talk about Trump affecting elections. So there was an Australian and Canadian election recently, and there's been a lot of headlines in the United States saying that Trump, had the effect of provoking nationalist response and anti right wing, so a shift to the left. Personally, I'm a bit dubious about those claims. I'm sure that might be part of the picture, but as you all know from the United States, the effect of foreign things on domestic elections is normally not, that much. And so I would be reluctant to say that Trump is responsible for the Australians electing a Labor government and the Canadians electing a Liberal government, although I'm sure it didn't help at the margin. So I think things are still in flux. There is obviously America's role in the world remains huge. I don't think that countries can escape that. They're going to have to come to terms with a lot of what's going on. But what Trump is doing is there's so much change. I mean, even the tariff policies that caused these huge swings have been paused now. He's made hints that he's going to exclude autos for cars and the car industry from these tariffs in the future. I still don't think anyone really knows what the new realities of US policy are that they have to come to terms with. And so they're probably, reckoning with the worst, at least in the case of the European Union in particular, and moving forward as best they can in a way that is going to have the effect of decoupling from the United States, even if that isn't where Trump ends up being in the end. So it's a mixed bag. The Trump administration so far. The big wins obviously being on immigration, halting the uncontrolled immigration across the southern border, but Americans don't seem to like it, and people abroad probably like it even less.
All right, so here's a question for both of you. I find it interesting to see how both the left and the right have seen Donald Trump as either being, on the left, this maniacal guy who is doing all of this planning to undermine us, and on the right, this sense of, hey, we had 4 years out and everything that we're doing now is a plan. I mean, I love it when I hear them talk about the tariffs and they say, well, of course we're back in negotiating now to try to get people more towards a free market solution. You couldn't have gotten them there had we not have pushed them harder in the beginning to have a big tariff, as if he planned this. And also ignoring the fact that we've changed tariff policy 87 times, right? It goes back and forth. What I'm surprised by isn't that he has come up with a master plan over the last 4 years. It's how this thing looks so ad hoc. There doesn't seem to me to be a plan at all. Like, why are we talking about invading Greenland? Why did we insult Canada? Why talk about you're going to run for a third term, even though, to be fair to him, he took that back off in the ABC interview the other day, at least substantially. Seems to me somebody's pushing him, saying, hey, as we're trying to stabilize this stuff, maybe we could quit talking about some of these crazy ideas, although I don't know that that would be an effective talk with him. But my point is, I don't see this as a plan at all. I see this I think Marco Rubio has a plan. I think Secretary Bassett has a plan. For that matter, I think Navarro has a plan. But I don't know that Donald Trump really has a plan. It seems to me like it's just ready, fire, aim, as they say. Thoughts on that?
I would largely concur. I think Trump has a genius at politically inciting a certain segment of the American electorate. He is instinctively a troll, which is why I think he does those things, such as talking about running for a third term where you have no idea whether he's being serious or not. The Canadians thought he was simply trying to humiliate them with the 51st state talk, but then later concluded that they're fearful that the guy may be serious. But I think he's instinctively a troll, and he plays that. He's clearly a narcissist. He wants to be the center of attention. I think he's got a very few set of things that he believes in terms of policy. I think he does believe in a protectionist tariff, for example. But in terms of implementing anything, I believe it is seat of your pants, ad hoc reactions to whatever's in the environment at any given point in time.
So on the tariff issue, do you believe there was any plan in terms of his rollout? Do you think that he planned to go high and then come back low? Or do you think that we still don't know where he's coming from on this issue?
Up until the time that he held his press conference on the reciprocal tariffs, there was no one within the White House who knew what he was going to announce. And what it was based upon was this idiotic formula, which assumes that all trade deficits are a result of trade barriers. And so you calculated what our trade deficit was, what percentage that was of overall trade, and cut it in half. That's not a serious, thought out approach to engage other countries in negotiating. That's a post hoc rationalization for it by Trump defenders. I mean, he decided to exempt Chinese electronics and didn't even announce it. It just occurred as a bunch of numbers in where the tariff applies to, and the tariff just wasn't applied to those numbers, something that the Trade Representative Office sent out. So no, it is completely ad hoc, which is not comfortable either for our country or the rest of the world from the leader of the most powerful nation in the world.
As somebody dealing with home building, I'd say it was more than not comfortable, but in any event. So Henry, one of my thoughts on this in terms of it being planned or unplanned, I don't know that we have any real ability to know where he is going to go over the next day, much less the next 6 months. It's very difficult for people to be able to plan around him. I don't think that's going to change. I think that he will constantly be finding a new means and a new way of chaos. And he'll always try to declare at the end of it that he was victorious and that he was successful, which, by the way, I'm happy with. I'd love for him to be able to declare victory on tariffs and get out. But one of the things that seems to me to be missing sometimes from our side is a real discussion about, well, okay, so let's take a look at this, let's observe, and let's figure out why it is that we opposed it. I look at the tariff issue and I see it generally as a discussion about, is central planning and big government better than decentralized government, one where the private sector and the private market plans for itself? I don't really see a lot of that discussion. Most of the discussion just is on the pain, as opposed to, is this really the right philosophy? And the other thing that I don't see a lot of is that we've bought into the assumption with Trump, and for that matter, Bernie Sanders and AOC, and it's really distressing to me to see that AOC is at the top of the lead on the Democratic side. But we bought into this notion that things were bad to begin with, as opposed to recognizing that the free market had actually delivered a lot of good to us. Your thoughts on that, specifically as a political economist?
Let me say one thing about planned or not planned, which is, remember all the hysteria about Project 2025, that it was this blueprint for like a right-wing totalitarian regime? I don't know where Trump's copy of Project 2025 is now. Maybe it's being used as a doorstop at Mar-a-Lago in one of the guest bathrooms or something, but it's obviously being just thrown out the window as they're careening along doing whatever they're doing.
Or opening up a page and saying, hey, let's try that one today.
Yeah, exactly. And then throwing it away and grabbing, I don't know, some other completely other book to get the next policy idea from, right? I mean, RFK Jr., does he have a chapter in Project 2025? No. I mean, okay. So I think that the Project 2025 hysteria was overblown. And I'd like to say also, we agreed on that before the election. I would like to say we were right on that one, that Trump was not going to be following this blueprint for right-wing totalitarian rule or whatever. We're not getting a good discussion of these, of the pros and cons of these policies, probably because they're simply changing too fast for anyone to really do much analysis in the meantime, right? I was talking to some friends last night, and one of my friends was asking me, what's so bad about these tariffs? Aren't they going to help workers by protecting American businesses, protecting American factories from competition from abroad and things? And I said, well, theoretically, that's kind of the argument, right? And there are arguments for industrial policy that under very specific circumstances, that if you get some companies up and running that have big export markets, then once they're up and running, they can find those export markets and the initial investment was worth it and all these sorts of things. But there's also just the straight up problem with waste. And so I tried to explain the tariff to me as like, imagine you go to the supermarket and buy a dozen eggs. But the tariff means that when you walk into the house, you have to smash a certain number of eggs on the ground. That's basically a tariff. Before you can put the eggs in your supermarket, you got to smash a few. Like, tariffs cause what economists call dead weight loss. They destroy resources. And so if you've got a tariff of 10% when you walk in with the dozen eggs and you've got to smash one egg on the ground and then you can use the rest of the eggs, it's not so bad. But if you have to smash 2 eggs on the ground, it's not very good. And then by the time you get to having to smash 3 or 4 eggs of every dozen before you walk in the house, you really have a big problem. And so the question is, how many eggs are we willing to smash in order to be able to allocate those eggs slightly differently once we enter the house, right? If the working class is, your son Bobby, and the capitalists, is your daughter Jenny, if you walk in the house and you have to smash half the eggs, but you get to reallocate them a little bit differently once you get inside, does it even matter how you reallocate them when you've smashed so many eggs getting into the house? And so we're not having a good discussion about what the actual deadweight loss of these tariffs is, how much wealth and prosperity is just being destroyed versus how much is being reallocated from Wall Street to the working class. We're not having a discussion on that. We're not having a real discussion on how much the benefits were of free trade versus the costs to certain sectors and whether they were divided up fairly or unfairly. We're not having a reasoned, rational discussion of that. And partly that probably is a deficiency in our broader public discourse, because that's a discussion we probably should have been having for a very long time, and not just by Bernie Sanders and by Trump and Steve Bannon, but by more reasonable people in the center. And it didn't happen in a productive way for a long time, and maybe that's why we ended up with such radical solutions. But I think that we're smashing a lot of eggs at the moment as we are bringing things into the country, and I think that it's a destructive process. And I wish that we could stop. It would be a good thing if we could stop with these tariffs and move on.
Yeah, your smashing of the eggs reminded me of literally my favorite book. I think I recommended it to Bob, and I won't endorse a political candidate unless they read this book. I recommend it over and over again. It's called The Rational Optimist. And one of the things that he does kind of a study or does a dissertation on trade, and he liked using fish hooks. And he said, okay, so if one guy produces 10 fish hooks and another guy can catch 10 fish, but the guy who produces 10 fish hooks can only catch 1 fish, and the guy who can catch 10 fish can only make 1 fish hook, there's an obvious trade for them. And he says, and it almost doesn't matter if it's, okay, I'll give you 5 fish hooks for 5 fish. It's better to, even if the idea was I want 6 of my fish hooks for 4 of your fish, right? Even if it's somewhat lopsided, you're still better off than where you started. Both groups end up benefiting from it. But I highly recommend that book. And it reminded me of your smashing eggs. All right, so here's the last one.
Paul, I thought you were just going to come right out and say Karl Marx's Capital. I'm so disappointed. Your suggestion, I thought you were going to come out and say, I've got a suggestion, I won't endorse any candidate. It's an old classic Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels Capital. And then you come out with such a reasonable, rational, optimistic book. Oh, Paul, I'm a little disappointed, I must say.
All right, well, we're gonna do a show about your book, which I should have mentioned here. Bob and I just went to Henry's event on his book, and it was really fun. I got your book, I read it this weekend, and I'm finishing the other book that you just sent me. Started reading it last night in more depth, and it was a better version. So, all right. So let me hit this last question and take this all the way back to the beginning. So I think there's little doubt, if this continues to move in the direction that it's moved, that the Democratic Party is going to do better in the upcoming election than the Republican Party. I think that's a fair assumption, but you guys can opine on that as you would. I think there is a unique opportunity for the independent and other voters and other candidates in this election that hasn't existed in the past. Now, I don't know if that's the Forward Party or no labels or just somebody running as an independent candidate themselves, but one of the things that I hear from people, and that we're seeing in polls, is as unpopular as Donald Trump is, Democrats are even more unpopular. There's not a sense that they're going to be the ones coming in and riding the white horse to save us. In fact, I think many people may vote for Democrats, but it's only because they have no other option. Bob, I'll come back to Bob last. Henry, I'll give you first thoughts on it, and then we'll let Bob finish it because it was his article.
There's this great saying, never interrupt your opponent while they're making a mistake. there's a long time until the midterm elections. I think that the Democrats would be smart to sit back and watch this scenario unfold, especially because how do you respond to something that's still in flux? You respond to something now and it's completely changed by next week. What's even the point? I think they hang back, they wait and see what happens. It's very early days, but they are going to be well served to just hang back and let this scenario play itself out.
I agree with Henry in terms of the best strategy for the Democrats. I'm also anticipating, as you are, a big Democratic year. Unfortunately, in our current two-party system, for an independent to have even a chance to break out, or a third-party candidate to have even a chance to break out, they have to be overwhelmingly wealthy in order to overcome the disadvantages under the existing system. So Bill Schultz, Karen Taylor Robson have that option. I don't think even a person of fairly substantial means really has that option. You and I are both strong supporters of an open primary system. My own belief is that the two-party system has served the United States well for most of its history, that it has produced far better governance than the multi-party systems that you see in most of the rest of the democratic world. But I believe that it has outgrown its usefulness. And it now is a hindrance to good governance rather than a facilitator of it. But in order to create viable options on an ongoing basis, I believe it does require some kind of structural change, such as the open primary. And that short of that, the American body politic is going to be stuck, which is what they've done since 1994, of incessantly toggling between the two parties based upon the dissatisfaction they have with that whichever party is in control. And I think realistically, we're going to toggle. We're not going to actually have a breakthrough such as you describe. Certainly if a Karen Taylor Robson ran as an independent and was highly successful, that starts opening up the dynamic. But short of institutional change, I think it requires extraordinary wealth to overcome the built-in advantages of the two major parties in our current system.
Yeah, you use Bill Schultz, and Bill Schultz is a great example for multiple reasons. But his first campaign he ran, I think it was called Energy for Arizona. And in that campaign, he ran against Barry Goldwater. I remember the campaign well. He was a Democrat at the time. But all he did was he spoke about Barry not showing up for enough meetings. That kind of was the entire campaign. When he came back the second time and then decided to switch to running as an independent, he actually had a period of time where he was in the lead according to the polls, and many people thought that he was going to win. But he had, I don't know if it was a lapse in judgment, but where he kind of went off the deep end on a couple of issues, looking like he was paranoid. And one of the analysis that I read back then was that what it did is it took this whole idea that he was an independent and there was no real brand for independence, and it made people more skeptical about whether or not he would be a great leader. I do think that if Karrin or someone decided to run as an independent, that is a great race to study, because the reason people liked him was because he was a growth candidate. He was a candidate that was talking about, he had this sense of caring about things like civil rights and equal rights and human rights as a Democrat, but because he was a business person that was an apartment builder, he also wanted to make certain that we were growing and adding jobs. The challenge is you can't misstep. You have to be really cautious not to do anything that looks flaky in that process, because you don't have the same brand as a Democrat or Republican almost immediately have. On the other hand, I think there are some built-in advantages. I genuinely believe, this is my own personal opinion, I think if Karrin ran the right campaign as an independent, I actually think she'd be successful. But saying that, Bob, thanks for that article. It was a great article. I recommend people go to Substack and get a copy of it. tell them how to do that if they've never been on Substack before?
It's robertrobb.substack.com. The subscriptions are free.
And tell them why Substack is such a great publication. I know it's increasingly becoming more popular, but what is it that people like about it?
It connects writers directly with readers without ads, without publishers, without editors. It is intended to be a way for writers to make money from people subscribing from them, and Substack handles all of the back office operations to make that possible. For me, it's mostly a retirement project, so mine are free and are going to stay that way, because if I charged for it, it'd be more like a job.
Yeah, well, I love reading your articles, and
Thank you.
I've enjoyed them for a long time, certainly when you were with the Arizona Republic. But you give a great analysis, and it comes from a great perspective, which is a conservative federalist who, as you said, may be more radical on the federalist issue, but yet with a high level of independence from the existing administration and being willing to call it the way that you see it. So thank you. All right. Again, thanks for being here with us on the New Frontiers, and we hope that you'll join us again in a couple of weeks. Thanks. Bye.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.